Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm Katie Earle. I oversee our University Express program for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And I'm here with Mark O'Brien. He's our Commissioner of Mental Health here in Erie County. Mark, thank you so much.
Good morning.
Yay. Love being virtual with you. So before we get into his presentation, quick housekeeping stuff. We'll communicate with you through our chat feature. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put that right in when you think of them. Your chat's located at the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you're on a computer, you'll see that little chat bubble. Or if you are on a tablet or smartphone, touch your screen. That brings up your control panel and you'll see a circle with 3 dots. And there you'll access your chat. So let's see how many questions we can get answered today. Quick shout out to our sponsors, which is my Department of Senior Services, Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for all of their support. And if you need anything, if you're looking to get involved, see what benefits you're eligible for, looking to get a ride places through our transportation program, give us a call. We're at 858-8526. Now, the star of our show, Mark O'Brien is a licensed clinical social worker with over 35 years of mental health, child welfare, and healthcare experience. He is a 1983 SUNY Buffalo School of Social Work graduate, and currently, as I mentioned, he's our Commissioner of Mental Health for Erie County. Additionally, he's in private practice in Tonawanda, specializing in treating survivors of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, as well as family and couples therapy. He resides in Grand Island with his wife. He's the proud father of 3 children and 5 grandchildren. An avid cyclist, he possesses a black belt in Taekwondo and is a former instructor. Mark, thank you for being here. I'll turn it over.
Katie, thank you so much, and welcome to everybody on the line today. I hope everybody is doing well. I hate to admit it, but I probably need to update my bio. Katie said I've got over 35 years. I'm over 40 years at this point.
Sheesh.
So, the gray hair is all sprayed in for effect. I'm actually just 29 years old, just on the umpteenth anniversary of that. So we do a lot of these presentations live, but we're going to go Memorex today. Questions are welcome. Comments are welcome. As I mentioned, Katie will read them and alert me to them because as I'm presenting them, quite frankly, I don't see them. So she keeps me focusing on task here. So welcome everybody. So we're going to talk about understanding coping with depression and its impact on suicide, and particularly with a focus on folks who are more senior, like yours truly. So let's talk about it. Depression. There's several different forms of depression, and the most common are major depressive disorder and dysthymic disorder. And you've heard the term bipolar. People have talked about it. It means 2 poles, but major depression itself is sometimes referred to as unipolar, just one of those poles. So you look at that, and dysthymic disorder is like a low level depression. So you don't go way down. It's like the blues, the blahs, that type of thing. It's more persistent, but a kind of a lower level of depressive disorder. It's characterized by a combination of symptoms that really interfere with folks' day-to-day activities. It's almost like having a wet blanket on you the whole time. Your colors don't feel bright. They feel muted. They feel gray. Everything feels like blah. It feels like a struggle to enjoy pleasurable activities. There's a word for that. It's called anhedonia, and that is a symptom of depression. And anhedonia, if you've ever heard the word hedonist, somebody who's always seeking pleasure, somebody who has anhedonia means you don't have the ability. Nothing seems pleasurable. Your food doesn't taste good. Your favorite show doesn't excite you. There's just nothing about it. It's disabling. It prevents a person from functioning normally, and it can be very recurrent. Can it run in families? Absolutely. As we talked about, dysthymia is like a long-term but less severe form of depression. You're able to function but it just feels like you're just chronically down. Can somebody have both? Absolutely. They can have a long-term dysthymia and go into major depressive episodes during their life. And the last one is called psychotic depression. And that's when a depression is not per se a disease of the brain. It's a disorder of mood. And I'm going to talk about neurotransmitters and how they affect mood and that type of thing. But when your mood is pushed up or pushed way down so much, then it affects the neurotransmitters that are in your brain and causes distortions. You've heard the term psychosis. Psychosis is, in effect, a break with reality. And somebody says, okay, what is reality? And reality, I'm going to give you a mental health definition, if you will. Reality is that which can be accurately determined by any senses. You can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can touch it, that type of thing. Reality is also that which can be measured. You have your desk has weight, your chair has weight, height, etc. And the other reality is that to which we have what's called communal consensual agreement. We look at what's today's date. Today is December 1st, 2022. Look at the year, 2022. What's that based on? It's based on an agreement that happened, based on something that happened 22 years ago. And what was it? Well, it was the birth of Christ. Well, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever, you may or may not believe in Christ. That's okay. However, he is an historical figure, and there has been a communal agreement to date the word. So December 7th, 1941 is that time. So there's agreement. When there's a break with that, that's what a psychosis is. And that can include having a sensory reception to which there is no stimulus. Meaning, if you see something that's not there, you are receiving something, but there's not there. If you are hearing something and you're hearing a voice that's not there, that's what break. Those are two symptoms of hallucinations. Those are sensory receptions. Delusions are an unreal belief that is not grounded in fact, that you can't talk a person out of just by means of rational or logical thinking. Right? It's a firmly held belief, but it's an unreal belief. Okay, postpartum depression happens after birth of a baby. You probably all heard about that, and those are the estimates of 10 to 15% of women experiencing postpartum depression after giving birth. Seasonal affective disorder. Okay, we all live in Buffalo or in the greater Buffalo region. So we all know that Buffalo has two seasons, winter and mud. Or some would say winter and construction. If you're a hopeful person, then you would say the build season and the rest of the year when they're winning. And probably one of the best and easiest definitions of bipolar disorder is a manic episode is the Monday after a Bills win. A depressive episode is the Monday after a Bills loss. As you can tell, I'm a Bills fan. Seasonal affective disorder is when we, in our long winters here, we go long periods of time where there is just less natural sunlight. We get a lot of cloud cover. There's a lot of long, dreary days. The sun actually does have effects on us in terms of our vitamin D, our neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, dopamine. And so long periods of long cloudy days, it gives people the blues, the blahs. And for some people, it just happens at that time of the year. Okay. So bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is an affective disorder. And again, it's a affect. The word affect means the physical representation of my emotional state, my mood. Affect is mood. And so if I'm talking to you like this, the term for that is euthymic. I'm okay, I'm fine. Let's go like this. If I'm saying, oh, this is great, this is wonderful, I'm very happy, or I'm saying I'm very sad and depressed about what things are. You're saying no big change in my mood. That's called a blunted or constricted affect. So bipolar disorder, there's a couple different types. First type is bipolar 1. And that becomes, if you look at, we all have a baseline, think of it as the street level. With mania, it's having like a rush. You've just had a couple of cups of coffee. You're on a low level high. You're walking about 3 feet off the ground. Your speech may be pressured. You may get less sleep. You may start feeling a little more excited, maybe a little more agitated. So bipolar 1 means you only get manic to whatever degree, and then when you stabilize, you come down to baseline. Bipolar 2 is you virtually just get depressed, and then you come back to baseline. The difference between bipolar depression and major depression is at some point in your life, you've had at least one manic episode. So if you've never had any type of mania, an elevated mood, not that you're just feeling good, but an elevated mood, because that can reach into higher levels of elevation where you're not sleeping, you're making poor decisions, impaired judgment. So if you've had mania once in your life, then we're talking bipolar disorder. The last type of it is what's called cyclothymic disorder, and that's like riding the roller coaster. It's the ups and downs of those moods. Okay. You see one depressed person, you see one depressed person. Depression can vary along type of person you are, your background. There's 2 terms that I'm going to throw out here. Terms themselves aren't important, but the concepts are. One is called an exogenous depression, and the other one is an endogenous depression. And the part of the terms that's important is the X and the N. The X means that there is some type of internal causation. You may be severely depressed because you lost your job, severely depressed because you're in prolonged grieving, severely depressed because you've been traumatized, you've been bullied, a number of things. There is an external causation. There's something going on, either now or in your past. Endogenous depression is there's no external cause. There's nothing going on out of the ordinary. And you'll see people say to somebody, well, why are you depressed? You got a great wife, a great husband, your kids are fine, you got a good job. It seems like your life is great. And there have been some very notable people here, and that Mike Wallace, Winston Churchill, that you would think have no reason to be depressed. You do not need a reason to be depressed. Depression can run in families without any external causation. What are the symptoms of depression? Persistent, sad, or empty feelings. It's just like a hole in your heart. Hopelessness, pessimism, guilt, worthlessness. And the thing about guilt and worthlessness is not only do you feel like you're not up to anybody else, everybody's better than you. If somebody really knew what was inside me, they would really not like you, they would reject you. Because you feel worthless, you beat yourself up for feeling worthless. And then what I found is people beat themselves up for beating themselves up. So you kind of have to recognize that. Somebody can be depressed and not look it, like they can be very restless, agitated, but behind it be very depressed. You talk about the influx of shootings and everything, and these are major tragedies, and people look at the homicidal ideations with this, but the studies are very clear that there's also an underlying suicidality with this. They're not looking to come out of these things alive, and they hate everybody else around themselves, but they hate themselves. They have themselves too. Now, the one thing I would say here is the incidence of violence corresponding to mental illness is actually rather low. People with mental illnesses are more likely to be a victim than to be a perpetrator, because you can go into all of these types of violent episodes with no diagnosable mental illness at all. Is there something wrong? Absolutely. But so other types of symptoms: fatigue, decreased energy, you just can't get up. Now, I understand that the folks we're talking to today are seniors, and you've had a long life experience. The other thing is, as you know well, these bodies that we have are not young like they used to be. I have to share with folks that I got my Medicare card this year. It's quite a little eye opener. But you know what? If you take care of yourself, you're feeling good, it's fine. But even taking care of yourself at 65, you're not going to feel like you were 30 anymore, unless you're one of those lucky few. So, fatigue and decreased energy. And the reason I bring that up is we're always going to be talking about, especially at this stage of life, is to make sure that there are no underlying physical causations, because medical difficulties can mimic some of these things. So anytime you're talking about diagnosing for depression or any other psychological disorders, you want to make sure that their medical causations have been ruled out, because there's a number of them that can mimic them. Thyroid problems, obesity, diabetes, a number of things so that can cause these types of symptoms. So concentration, difficulty making decisions, changes in sleep, whether people are sleeping all the time or can't sleep at all. You look at those as hallmarks: changing in appetite, eating more, eating less. And we're going to talk a lot about suicide. So we talk about thoughts of suicide and attempts, etc. And a lot of persistent achiness and pains. Okay. Oh. All right. I think. Okay. Hang on a second. Okay. There's a difference between how men and women experience depression. First of all, in this society, women, whether they're more or less likely to experience depression is really not known or not knowable, but they're clearly more likely to seek help for it. And we think there's a cultural factor with this. So women are more likely to present for that and admit to that. But depression runs very rampant in both men and women. And the numbers are really 1 of 5 people have had a diagnosable mental health episode in their present time. So there's people, almost 20% of people, when you look at depression, anxiety, and the various forms of mental illnesses, 1 in 5, that's 20%. And up to 75% of people can have a diagnosable period of a diagnosable mental health episode at some point in their life, whether it's dysthymia, anxiety, etc. And keep in mind, the difference between health and pathology or illness is always degree. Illness is even on the mental health side, is a form of degree of what would otherwise be normal. For example, with anxiety, is anxiety a normal feeling? Absolutely. And at times, anxiety will keep us alive. If you're driving up a mountain road and off to the side there's like a kind of a little guardrail and there's a steep embankment there, and you're a little nervous and being extra careful driving up that mountain road, I say good. You're more likely to get up there okay and get down there okay. If you're just not worrying about it and flying along, That's not the car I want to be in. So with depression is more common among women than men. There are biological and psychological factors that affect their depression rate differently than men, including menstrual cycles, um, um, the going into menopause, pre and post. The hormone changes are very different. I think there's probably not a woman on this planet that would tell you that maintenance is probably a whole lot more difficult. Um, and but with what they've done, it's you can understand that women tend to outlive men by an average of 4 to 5 years. And I think that is pretty safe to say they're probably the stronger and more resilient in a lot of ways, and that's why you see them living longer. But they also going to experience depression sometimes in greater numbers. And we'll see, like, for example, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. That is the time just before the menstrual cycle, resulting in major hormonal changes around ovulation. Men experience depression. Men are more likely to see it and not identify it directly. Talk about fatigue, being irritable, like you said, loss of interest in things that they did before, sleep disturbances. They're not usually going to be able to put their hands on it as directly as females will. They're more likely to turn to alcohol or drugs when depressed. And especially with alcohol, alcohol is a depressant in and of itself. So in the moment, the person may feel better while they're drinking, but as that wears off in and of itself, that's going to add to that. There you will see higher levels of irritability, anger, and sometimes violence. Or you may see them withdraw more so. And so there's again, we're talking about in this society, there's a greater acceptance and a greater schooling of women to be able to network and talk about those feelings as opposed to men. When we talk about suicide, the difference in gender is women are more likely to attempt, men are more likely to complete. And those are important statistics to know. How do older adults experience depression? Again, with aging, there's changes to our bodies. There's physical changes. We slow down. We have greater aches and pains. Maybe get arterial sclerosis, atherosclerosis. We get hardening of the arteries. Our hearts aren't as vigorous. We don't feel like our minds are as sharp. Our memories may not feel like they are as great. And we have, and that's just part of the normal aging process. And it's very different from person to person, depending on a host of things, including biological factors, genetic factors, and very importantly, how well you take care of yourself in terms of self-care and health-related factors. So even if you're grow old gracefully and in a very healthy way, and say you could be 80, 85, etc., and I can't assume the audience age here, but let's say that there's folks on this call who are at 85 or more. I'm at 65. So you on the call who are 85 have actually as good or a better chance of reaching 86 than I do of reaching 66. And the reason is you've already beaten the curve. So you've already outlived the average age of other males, females, what have you, which means either by genetics or by your health habits, something has worked for you. And I say, go you. Good for you. Whatever you're doing, keep it going. The downside to all that is if we live long enough, we stay healthy, maybe not everybody around us has. So if we live long enough, we're going to experience a lot of loss in our lives. Maybe our husband, our wives, our best friends, our siblings. And not only do we lose people we love, sometimes very young, sometimes suddenly, sometimes to old age. Sometimes we've lost them to Alzheimer's or dementia. So the person is still there physically, but the person we knew and loved isn't there. These are all losses we grieve. And that is, part of the life cycle. So the upside is we stay on this earth longer, but we can feel more isolated. We can feel like there's a greater sense of having something missing in our life. So these are types of things that are normal sadness or grief related types of things that we will deal with. But when depression happens, it amplifies all those things. We talked about more medical conditions, disease, stroke, cancer. There are certain medications we take that if you've ever read the physician's desk reference or the labels or even Google anything about any medication you take, there is no medication that you would take that will not list side effects. There's not one. They all list side effects. That doesn't mean you're going to have the side effects. It means these are potential side effects. It means you could have them. So with your doctor, you look at what's the risk benefit analysis here. What am I risking getting a side effect that I might get, but what do I really need from this and what does it do for me? So we talk about things like vascular depression. That's when blood vessels become less flexible, they harden over time, they become restricted, and that can include the brain. And as we talked about, that can not only have cognitive distortions, you can also have affective distortions with that. There is no known single cause of depression. And that's why I talked about the endogenous versus exogenous. You can have just a wonderful life and have everything go right for you and be profoundly depressed. Your mother doesn't have to have had it. Your father doesn't have to have it. Your Aunt Millie could have had it. Your grandfather could have had it. Or nobody that you know in your family could have had it. But we're going to talk about what those are. And what we have to look at with depression is a physical illness with psychological symptoms, as is anxiety disorder. These are physical conditions with psychological symptoms. And it's really good to know that because it takes it out of the closet. Because a lot of times people feel like they're depressed or they're anxious and they don't want to tell anybody because they feel like somebody's going to judge them or say this is a character flaw or there's something wrong with me. And there really isn't, because it can happen to anybody. Okay, so again, we've talked about negative life experiences can cause them. One of those experiences, death of a loved one, divorce, separation, breakup, custody, family, children types of issues, losses of house, money. Keep in mind when people retire, for example, one of the issues people talk about is their finances. Are we set for this? But there's other things that when people retire, are they ready for it? If you're a person who's worked all your life, what was your role? Did you have a title? What was your job? What was your skill set? What was your routine? What was your interactions with people at work? I mean, think about it. If you go to work, you spend 8 hours a day, 8 hours awake. So you'll spend more awake hours with the people you work with than the people at home. You get home at 5, say maybe you're falling asleep 9:30, 10. Well, you've had about 5 hours or so with your wife or husband, etc. But you've just been 8 hours with the other person. So what is that sense of role, connectivity? And the big thing that brings most people together during their productive years, and I say productive, I mean family raising, work related, because it doesn't mean your senior years can't be productive. But what brings most people together is purpose. What is that purpose? Is it a job? Is it a career? Is it volunteer work? Is it certain organizations? And when they don't feel like they've had that purpose, what am I getting up for tomorrow? And that's when it's finding ways in your retirement to really make that time meaningful. And that could be a host of things. It could be very enjoyable things that you do, but it's a different phase of life. So we talk about serious illness, terminal illness, whether it's you or somebody you love, serious accidents, very traumatic, physical and chronic pain. And again, you'll feel the intense emotional pain when somebody feels like they're depressed. Keep in mind something, we're going to talk about suicide. When somebody really contemplates suicide, people don't want to die. They don't want to hurt. If you talk to a suicidal person and they'll tell you, I want to die. And if you ask them the further question, why do you want to die? And they will give you words, they will tell you, it says, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to hurt anymore. And if you didn't feel like this, if you didn't hurt this, would you want to die? And usually they'll say, no, I don't want to hurt. Okay? Loss of hope. I'm going to talk about the big things of what's really important with hope. I'm going to come back to that a lot. Being victimized, either as a young person or as an elderly person, because how many times are people victimized? Not only rape, assault, those types of things, but things like scams, where people come in and you get the call that your grandson is in jail. If you send this money by this way, it gets out, and it wasn't your grandson. Okay, again, loved one being victimized, physical abuse, and even verbal abuse, because some will tell you that even after the physical part is over, the words last longer. Sexual abuse, no matter what age that happens, those become lifelong issues. And any unresolved abuse from the past. Okay, these are other symptoms from it: feeling trapped, that sense of hopelessness, nothing's ever going to be back. Helplessness, nobody likes to feel helpless. We all like to feel like we have control over what we're doing. There's two terms. The terms aren't important, but the concepts are. One is efficacy, and the other one is effectiveness. You've heard of the term efficacy probably in terms of like medication, that this medicine is efficacious for this or that other thing. Efficacy is the belief that we have control. It is the belief that we can impact our environment. Effectiveness is the knowledge that we've done that. It's the experience gained from that and the confidence of that. So the first time is looking at efficacy is almost like that leap of faith that I believe I'm going to be able to do it. The effectiveness is I know I'm going to be able to do it because I've already done it. They feel that they feed off of each other in a good way. Legal problems can contribute, feeling taken advantage of, feeling used, because when you feel like you've been used or taken advantage of, it diminishes our ability to be vulnerable to somebody else. And I would submit to folks, I do a lot, I still do private practice myself. I do individual work, I do marital work, and I would submit, at least in my humble opinion, that I no longer believe that love is the best basis for a relationship. You can love somebody but not trust them. But if you trust somebody, then anything is possible. When you think of not only your wife, your husband, or whatever, but think of that best friend. Think of that person you call. You may love them. You may feel, and I don't mean in a sexual love. You may feel like you are just akin to them, but you trust them. And here's the big thing with trust, and it's a four-letter word that goes along with it. And people don't want to acknowledge this, but this is where it comes with. For trust to happen, somebody has to take a risk. Meaning I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm opening myself up. I've taken a risk. And it depends on how you respond to that risk. Have you been gentle with me? Have you been there, consistent? Have you rewarded that risk? The next time I open myself up to you, I don't feel as vulnerable. That risk becomes less and less and less to where it becomes no longer a risk. That's when we feel like we trust somebody. The way to look at it is we have a number of bricks in our lives. Are we building bridges or are we building walls? In simplest terms. Feeling humiliated at some point, feeling like a failure. Again, we talked about alcohol abuse, other substances abuse, which there's a lot of going on right now, and it's at a very deadly time because people are sometimes it's a one and done because there are so many drugs out there that are laced with fentanyl that you take the wrong thing and that's it. Feeling of not being accepted by family or friends or anything else, and that gets projected out to others, but it really becomes, how do I feel about myself? How do I feel about that person in the mirror? You know, being something of a Marxist, and when I say Marxist, I don't mean Karl Marx, I mean Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx, for us oldsters, the Marx Brothers, Groucho Marx once said, I would never belong to any club that has a member like me. There's a note of that with somebody who's depressed, who doesn't feel good about themselves. If you don't like you, the person that cares about you, well, I don't like me, why do you like me? So you don't trust that other person either, and that get projected on. So really, it's having some good self-acceptance, and that's not the same thing as being egotistical or anything like this. Is self-acceptance is, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, these are my problems, but this is who I am, and it's like I'm okay. Having disappointments in life, um, feeling like you have not measured up to who you thought you were going to be or who somebody else thought you were going to be. Bullying is a big thing, makes people feel vulnerable. Low self-esteem, that is really, I look at low self-esteem as more as a result than a cause. It usually comes on with something else. Okay. Neurotransmitters. The concept is actually important here. If you look at this, you're going to see these are two ends of a neuron. So you think about what your brain is. Our brain is not a mechanical machine. It's an electrochemical machine. Quite honestly, when you raise your hand up and down, you don't have a voice going on in your head saying, I'm raising my hand. Think about it. There's no thought going on. You're just doing it. Your brain's still sending a message down to there. It also works with our limbic nervous system, which conveys our emotional regulation. So if you think about the neurons and dendrites here, my arm is a neuron. The endpoints of it are what's called the dendrites. At the ends are the synapses. So my brain shoots an electrical chemical message down my arm, which is the neuron, and it fires it out, and it sends that message to the next neuron. This one fires this one, which fires this one, and so on. But if you notice on the diagram and on my demonstration here, they don't touch. Open your hands, put one out, put that one out. So what happens is the message shoots the gap from this to this, kind of like the internet these days, right? So it shoots it over. What conveys it over? It's a neurotransmitter. And neurotransmitters, as this one shoots it to this one, it's like a gasoline engine that's sucking up gasoline every time the spark plug fires, or at least in the older ones, right? So every time this fires this one, and those neurotransmitters in there start sucking up into the body. That's how it works. Well, when there's too much that's been depleted during that, then we get into an imbalance, and it depends on which neurotransmitter is being depleted. So these are the major neurotransmitters: dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. And these are the types of things that when you have an imbalance in these things, these are the effects you're going to see. So you're going to see norepinephrine. Another name for norepinephrine is noradrenaline. It's a form of adrenaline. Well, if you don't have any adrenaline going on in your body, then you're going to feel fatigue, and you're not going to feel alert, and a loss of concentration. Think about it when you are all hyped up, your adrenaline's running, you feel like hyper focused and everything. And when we talk about treatment, people have heard about medications and various types of chemical interactions. But people have heard about things called electroconvulsive therapy. Shock treatments in the old days, most people don't understand what shock treatments do. It's not the first line. It's not even the second line. It's for treatment-resistive patients with depression. There's other that are coming out on ketamine and a few others, but we don't need to talk about that too much today. But what shock treatment does, it's when somebody is in a supervised medical setting, and that's the only place it's done, the person is sedated, the shock treatment throws them into an epileptic grand mal seizure, That's all it does. And when somebody goes into a grand mal seizure, your brain is shooting out bags of norepinephrine in a way that you can't get in another way. Your body isn't doing it. That's all ECT does, is it puts you into a grand mal seizure. So you'll see serotonin. What does that control? So you're seeing these types of neurotransmitters sucked up in the body. When you understand that, it's important to know this for people to say it's a physical problem. It's a physical illness with psychological symptoms. They know which one is not. So they look at how your symptoms come out, and that's where you'll see your doctor talking about these. So these are the mechanisms of depression. Is you'll see those neurotransmitters on the left there. The brain sends a message, shooting it down from one to another. Here it goes back and forth. When there's too little coming along there, that's what's happening. That is the problem. A treatment part, I'm going to give you a very easy explanation for what treatment does in terms of medications and stuff, because you're going to talk about medications. Essentially, we talked about this one firing this one. You'll see these yellow circles here. What they're doing is a certain type of medication. The most common and the most effective antidepressant right now is what's called an SSRI. This is the long term. It's called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I'll tell you what that means. There are certain forms of serotonin that this will target, and it will target the receptors. As this is firing, there are receptors at the end of each one of these things, and it's sucking up the neurotransmitter to convey that electrical message, but sucking up too much. So the medications are simply coating the ends of the neurons so that it doesn't suck up as much. It's keeping the body from uptaking too much of the neurotransmitter of reuptaking. So that's what an SSRI means. It's selectively keeping the body from sucking up too much of the gas in the engine, quite frankly. So depression, in some cases, it's called the common cold of mental health concerns. It is the most frequently diagnosed and it is the most treatable of mental illnesses. The first thing when he talks about is visiting a doctor is you can, as I said before, you want to rule out anything physical. Because if you don't rule out something physical, you've taken your car into the shop for 2 flat tires and you're having them check the oil. So you want to make sure that you know the right questions first. So if you got the flat tires, let's change the tires or let's repair the tires. Let's not go for the oil. So medical conditions and certain of these things, like I said, thyroid disorder, obesity, diabetes, there's a number of things. Even with, you'll see depression with dementia, Alzheimer's disease, you'll see anxiety with those. You want to rule out the physical examinations. There's a whole host of things that physically can mimic depression. So you want your doctor, or and it could be the place to start with is your primary. That's where most people should start with. The reality is, people talk about psychiatrists, and the psychiatrists are very important in the medical profession, as we talk about here. But there are more primary care doctors prescribing antidepressants appropriately than there are psychiatrists. First of all, there's just more of them. It's the front line with it. So that's the first place. That's the first place to start. But is to get a complete history, because it's important to know how long have you been struggling with this? What type of symptoms do you have? How frequently? All that goes into a complete medical evaluation. Is there anything external that's part of this? Is it totally internal? Is there alcohol and drugs in there? What is a person's thought about death or suicide? And when we talk about suicide, people are afraid to ask people, oh, they have to say, well, you have to harm yourself. Are you going to hurt yourself? No, you can go ahead. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever thought of suicide? I can guarantee you, after 40 years of mental health, I've never, ever given anybody the idea of committing suicide by asking that question. You know, I hadn't thought about it. That's a good idea. I'm sorry you asked me about that. It doesn't work that way. So if you have a friend or a spouse or somebody like this, and you think they're thinking about that, go ahead, gently, kindly, but feel free to ask them, because you might be that one person who's lowering down a lifeline, a rope, to that person who may feel very isolated and feel like, I can't talk to anybody about this. And I can tell you, a load shared is a load lightened. And I will also, and probably come into this later, and there's 3 things that you do not see when you have suicide, or 3 most important factors that you do not see. And it's purpose, hope, and connection. When you have those 3 things, people keep going. Okay? All right. So, treatment for depression. The most common is psychotherapy, talk therapy. Have you ever had a conversation with a friend or anybody that you just let it all out? You may feel exhausted afterwards, but usually you feel a little lighter. And again, depression loves dark places. It loves isolated corners. So where you're bringing that out, where you're feeling connection, where you're feeling hope, you're feeling somebody cares. With psychotherapy, any type of psychotherapy, we'll talk about it, but the most common form of treatment is what's called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. It looks at their thoughts, their behaviors, And the first thing is finding a therapist who you feel comfortable with, confident in, that not only do you feel like they know what you're talking about, but you feel connected, that you feel like they care. Because all the training in the world for any therapist and that type of stuff, there are certain techniques you can use and that kind of stuff, but it's not like doing surgery. Mostly it's teaching you as a therapist how to use yourself to help somebody else. And when a person really feels connected, that's where they've taken that risk, as we said, the trust starts to develop, the bricks from the wall start coming down, and you start using it to build bridges. And if I feel connected to somebody else, I'm not going to feel so alone. I'm not going to feel so helpless. I'm not going to feel so hopeless. So I have some purpose, hope, and connection. Right? So we've kind of already talked about the medications, about the most notable ones, serotonin and norepinephrine. And these are, you can see what are the most common SSRIs. The SNRIs are the selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. They're keeping the body from sucking up too much of the norepinephrine. And there's a couple of older types that don't get used as much, tricyclics and MAO inhibitors, but those don't get used too much. But the first part is when we talk about psychotherapy or doing talk therapy, when you're talking about depression, first of all, is learning what is depression. Because as I said before, people who are depressed think that I'm the only one depressed. They also think something's wrong with me. And they beat the hell out of them. So I'm not worthless. I'm not up to your standards. I'm not up to my standards. If people really knew me, they don't know my pain. And then they beat the hell out of themselves. And then they beat the hell out of themselves for beating the hell out of themselves. Part of the work of cognitive behavioral therapy is looking at those thoughts and feelings. And when we talk about our feelings, people say, you say, what is your reality? Well, reality is what I think it is. And that's really not the case, not in mental health terms. Facts, reality are those things I described, those things that are observable, behavioral. A fact may be, I said, Katie, wow, look at those glasses you got. Those are big ones. I saw those in the 1970s. Well, what do we know of that? A, we know she's wearing glasses. And all we know is I said those glasses, I saw those in the 1970s. I'm making an observation. Katie, how do you feel about me saying I saw those glasses in the 1970s?
Doesn't bother me at all.
Okay, what is your reaction to it? Was that a positive thing? Was it a negative thing? Was it
A little indifferent. I like my glasses, so I'm confident enough to still wear them.
okay? So let's say that Katie, I've said, all we really know is Katie, those are big glasses. I saw those in the 1970s. If she says, 1970s, that's kind of like I'm saying it's a out of date thing, an out of style thing. You look funny. I'm saying something like this. She may perceive it as I'm being insulting, as I'm denigrating her, I'm minimizing her, I'm saying, and if she perceives that way, then she may feel a little insulted, may feel put off, may feel hurt. But her feelings didn't come from what I said. Her feelings came from how she perceived it. With the same statement, if I followed that up with, in the 70s, boy, that's when style really exploded and people were snappy. And boy, that reminds me of like when really women came into their own into the workplace, and it's just a great time to be around. Then she's going to perceive it differently. She's going to feel it differently. But Katie said it very well. My statement itself was actually quite neutral. And then she perceived it, well, I'm confident in this, I'm good with this, and she's good to go. So some of that is saying, let's take a look at what happens, what are our perceptions, because with depression, we tend to distort a lot of things. We tend to put the worst meaning to them. And if we do, then our feelings change with this. And also some behaviors, like if I'm isolating myself and I'm not around anybody and I'm feeling lonely and nobody's going to connect with me. Well, you're right. Nobody is going to connect with you in your living room. And I'm not talking about the internet, is being around people physically. So what do I need to do? Because sometimes we change the behavior before we change the thought. Well, where did you like to be before? Well, I used to love sitting in art classes, but I'm too old to paint and draw. Can you sit through an art class? Well, maybe. Are you sitting in a club where people are talking? What have you? It's changing the environment. So we talked about types of psychotherapy. As I mentioned, the most common one is cognitive behavioral therapy. Interpersonal therapy, or another term for it is psychodynamic therapy, is talking about how to work through relationships. And some of that is using that trusting relationship with a counselor, a therapist, or whatever, to saying, okay, I'm trusting somebody, or a trusted friend. Can I reach out to somebody and reconnect? Again, purpose, hope, and connection. But part of that is also learning to understand what is depression, what are the signs, what are the symptoms, and how to manage it. Because if I realize that other people have the same thing as I do, then it is a condition for me to be managed. Okay, we're going to go through this quickly. Suicide cause, untreated depression, number one cause. This quickly talks about methods. You're seeing an increase in the use of firearms. There used to be, and there still is, a great disparity between male and female uses of firearms. The use of firearms for suicide attempts is more common in males, but it's increasing in females. And that's a very concerning sign, because firearms are very unforgiving. And because you had an increased use of firearms from males, that's why you had a lower survivability rate of attempted suicides. It's so unforgiving. Where if you've attempted an overdose or strangulation, or things like turning on the car in the garage with the garage down, there is the opportunity to, quite frankly, change your mind in the middle of it, or be rescued. This is the theory we talked about. This is, remember, the antidote to what I talked about is that hope, connection, and purpose. But where you see these things, where I feel like I'm alone, I feel like I'm a burden, and I'm not afraid to die, that intersection right in the middle where you see it says the desire for suicide is, I don't want to hurt. And this is a great illustration of I don't want to hurt, because I don't want to feel alone. I don't want to feel a burden to somebody. When they don't feel that way, when you feel like you have something to lose, then you're afraid to die, which is good. That's healthy. That's how we keep going. The lowest rate of suicides in this country for demographics is African American females. Statistically and far away. They're matriarchal in the society, strong family connections, strong sense of purpose. It is far and away. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but compared to the other demographics, the number one demographic for suicide, people think it's teenagers. It's not. It's white males, and usually 55 or over. Suicide for teenagers becomes a second or third, but it's high and growing, unfortunately. So suicide does happen in older adults and is a risk. How are we doing on time? Good.
Yep.
Couple more minutes. We're good.
Perfect.
Okay. Again, here's suicide risk factors. With adults, it's loss of primary relationship, big type of thing. You're used to having your wife, your husband there. You've been there with them 30, 40 years, and now they're gone. That's a big risk. Being a survivor of somebody else, when you know somebody else who is suicided, it increases the risk for other people. Because it makes it real, it makes it doable. And sometimes there's a lot of guilt involved with somebody who is survived somebody else's attempt. Again, substance use, you look at teenage challenges, rejection, bullying, and that type of thing. We've talked about the risk factors, and these are things you look for. You look for substance abuse. You look for a history of prior attempts. History of prior attempts increases the danger, even if accidentally. Some people say, well, they're just doing it to get attention or get sympathy. They're really not. They're doing it because they hurt, and sometimes they'll change their mind at the last minute. But sometimes when you see these things, sometimes they misjudge, and they can die, quote unquote, accidentally of a suicide attempt. You always look for what is the means, because how many times has somebody in the heat of a moment just grabbed a gun? When you have time to calm down, and that's the whole thing about suicide prevention, is buying time, buying space for that person to come down, collect themselves, and consider alternatives. Because keep in mind, suicide is a permanent response to a temporary situation. And I don't even use the permanent solution words, because it's not a solution, but it is a permanent response to a temporary situation. Okay? So these are the things that, as I said before, women are much more likely to attempt suicide, and males are more likely to complete it. But that doesn't make women any less at risk. Elderly Caucasian males, high suicide risk. Hopelessness, helplessness are two big things to look for suicide risk. You look at the warning signs, increase in agitation. There's a big correlation with people seeing their primary doctor not long before a suicide attempt. Sometimes they go to the doctor, but then they don't say what's on their mind. They don't say what they're doing. Part of my work as a therapist is to listen to what you're telling me, but also to listen for what you're not telling me. And that's why I'm fishing in the pond, and I'm baiting the hook, and I'm saying this, and you're telling me this, and I go, and you say, no, it's not. Okay, all right. Maybe I got to go fish in the other pond. But then sometimes I got to come back and say, no, maybe I was fishing in the right pond. And somebody will say, well, if I've got a good relationship with the person, they say, I don't feel that way. And I go, oh, yes, you do. And they go, oh, yes, I do. So sometimes you have to challenge somebody, and you kind of, if you have a good relationship with them, because they may not always tell you at first. So go with your gut, go with your instinct. It doesn't mean we can actually tell somebody how it feels, but you can kind of take that risk and saying, are you feeling this way? I don't think you are. Well, you know what? I'm wondering if you are. Sometimes it's okay to press a bit. Okay. Again, warning signs: changing eating, sleeping, increase in emotional turmoil, substance abuse, despair, and fatalism. Does somebody have a sense of future? If they're not talking about anything beyond tomorrow, next week, or that type of stuff, if somebody's telling you about plans they have 6 months, a year from now, I feel like hell right now, but I can't wait for that trip in London next year. That tells you something. Is there still future orientation? Okay, there's warning signs, but there's also protective factors we're going to talk about. Talked about anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. Shame is a big thing, especially based on pain. We all have healthy regrets of things we wish we'd done differently, didn't do. That's okay. That makes us human. I worry about the person who has no regrets for anything. You want to have some of that. But when it's morbid, shame-based, too much, then we're talking about something else. Protective factors. What are the things that can tell me that this person is probably going to be okay? Is there's certain religious beliefs that, like Catholics or whatever, is they believe I'm going to hell if I suicide. There's other religions too. Is sometimes it's just their faith saying my faith keeps me strong, a belief in a higher power. You don't have to be religious, but for those people who have that, it's a big connector for them, and they feel like they're in somebody else's hands. It's big. Positive social support, people around them, friends, family, what have you. Uh, Pregnancy is something it's a future orient for women. Children in the household. There are people who are depressed, but I have to stay strong for my kids. It's a protective factor. My kids need me, I would never leave them, type of thing. Satisfaction with life, particularly where you are. The most well-adjusted people are the people who have a future orientation, are okay with the past, but live in the present, because that's really all we have. What you and I have is today. We have the promise of tomorrow, the hope for tomorrow. And we all know we have an expiration date, but I would imagine, even if you could be told, I can't imagine there's a whole lot of people on this call that would want to know that date. I can tell you I don't. If I've got 20 days or 20 years, don't tell me, because I don't want to count backwards. I know we're going to cash out: death, taxes, the only two things that are for certain. Okay, this is what we do. When we talk about safety planning, crisis planning, it's not a contract for safety. It's actual safety. What are you going to do is understanding, here are my recognizable warning signs. What are the things for me that tells me I'm in trouble? What are the things that help me when I'm in trouble? Things that I can do at home with wife, with kids, whatever. What are the things that can help me? Who are my informal supports? Who are the people in my world that I can reach out to at that time? Who are my formal supports? Who is my therapist? Who is my doctor? What's crisis services number? What's the 988 number? Formal are my paid, contracted type of supports. Who's in my toolbox, right? Those are the things that you look at in terms of crisis planning. And you actually put those out there. So when I'm in a bad place, I know what to do that keeps me going. Where does it hurt? How does it hurt? Understanding yourself, getting a better sense of reading that, because there's the thoughts, there's the feelings, and there's the physical pain with this. And looking at how do I break down problems into manageable tasks. Skill building are those types of things, like when we talk about stress tolerance types of things. We all have various stresses. That's not the point. That is life. How do we learn to be comfortable with discomfort at a time? Being normal doesn't mean being pain-free. Being not depressed doesn't mean they're going to have a down day or just a blah day or that kind of stuff. Being anxious means not a total lack of anxiety. How do we do these types of things? So these are the things that we do that build our toolbox. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly because we've already kind of covered this. This is, I'm not smart enough to have made this up. It's know the signs. It's kind of it's a mnemonic memory device for people to understand. These are the things to look for in terms of the signs. We've basically already called them. Gotta cover them. Okay, so again, it's better to kind of be mindful and to be able to say something. You're not going to cause something by asking somebody about that. Okay, and I think, how can I help myself if I'm depressed? So again, exercise releases endorphins. Keep moving. Change location. Get out in the sunlight. Activities that stimulate you, that keep you connected, to keep you focused, keep you purposeful, are always, always good. It's the same thing your doctor's going to tell you. Be realistic with yourself. Okay? Break up things into smaller, doable tasks. Then they're not overwhelming. And then recognize the progress you make when you get it. Spend time with other people. Confide in a trusted friend or whoever. Isolation breeds depression. Depression breeds isolation. Purpose, hope, and connection. Don't expect your mood to snap out of it. You're going to recognize when you're starting to feel a little better and a little better each day. Okay? If you don't feel like you're up to making a decision, don't make a decision, especially a major life decision. If you don't feel like you know whether you should get married or you're getting divorced or something like this, if you don't feel good with the decision, not making a decision is a decision too. Okay? And you look at, well, it's depression or whatever. I want to know what you're feeling physically. I'm going to want to know what you're thinking. Look at those depressive thoughts. Okay, and here is for help in the media time, crisis services, 834-3131 number is there. But the easiest thing to remember right now is 988 is the National Suicide Prevention Line. It will kick back to crisis services here, unless, of course, you have an area code on your phone that's not 716 that you had it from someplace else. It may route you someplace else, but they're ultimately going to route you back. And there's people who are trained, qualified on the phone to help work somebody through and problem solve. So, Katie, how are we doing?
We are great, Mark. We're a little over, but that's okay because this was a wonderful presentation, incredibly thorough as always. Thank you. We have someone who's wondering if you can go back to the know the signs slide again, please.
Sure.
And then once we get there, there's a question that I'll read.
There we go. Okay.
All right. So someone's wondering, what's the best way to support the immediate family post-suicide?
That's a great question. First of all, like any therapist, it's kind of oversimplifying something, but the good Lord gave you two of these and one of these. Be with somebody. Listen. Empathize. Ask them what they need. Ask them how they're feeling. Sometimes they're going to be willing to talk. Sometimes they're not ready. But sometimes just being with somebody is a help. It also depends on a lot of factors. How close was the relationship with the person they lost to suicide? What was the nature of their relationship? Because sometimes the relationship was good and close, and sometimes you may have had a contentious relationship or an estranged relationship with somebody, and all that can affect, you know, and ask them how they feel about what happened. How long ago did it happen? Is this a fresh suicide? Is this new? Is this something that happened years ago? The person may feel like, I should have known. I missed a sign, or if I had done this or I had done that, and that type of thing. And you know, the suicide is the action of the person who did it. They're in a place of pain. They don't want to be in pain. And sometimes it is well thought out, well planned, and people say, I missed the sign. But sometimes people are kind of at peace because they made a decision. And that's a very tricky thing, but that's something to watch out for too, because they think, oh, they're better. They seem great. That great was, I'm going to be out of pain. And again, suicidal people don't want to die. They want to be out of pain. So if they made that decision, they know, I'm not going to wake up hurting tomorrow. And that's a hard thing to look for, even for a therapist. You know, sometimes a therapist has missed that too. It's like, I didn't see it. So that's the big thing. And also helping them, there's a ton of information on coping with suicide. Even there's the national, oh my God, I'm blanking on the suicide National Foundation, the National Foundation for Suicide Prevention. You can Google that. Um, there's all sorts of there's videos in terms of family members talking about what they went through. There's such an overwhelmingly good wealth of information out there to expose people to getting in support groups. There's a lot of help now.
Thank you,
Any other
Mark. Thanks for
questions?
that. Now I'm just seeing a couple comments. I'm seeing the differences between how men and women experience depression was really interesting. And thank you so much for talking about this, which I will echo both of those.
Well, and thank you for your time. It's a very different experience. I've done these remotely with Katie and in other venues, but I've also do these. We do these pretty regularly at various senior centers and some other places. We'll do one on anxiety. We'll do one on mental health in the workplace, at home. So these are great questions, and I hope people can kind of take a look at these things, and that's helpful for either them or for somebody they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, thank you for your time. Everyone who's on, thank you so much. I'll be working on posting this on our University Express website over the next couple days, so look for that by early next week. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye.
Bye bye, everybody.